Good morning friends and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on Indian poetry in English. As you well remember that in the previous lecture we talked about one very significant voice named Bibhu Padhi, and till now we have discussed three professor turned poets. But then one thing which we all have to realize, that poetry is nobody's slave. It is not essential that a poet, whether writing in any language, has to be a professor. Today we are going to talk about one such voice who, even though not attached to any academic institution, has created ripples in the world of poetry, and this person is none other than Gopi Kottoor. Gopi Kottoor is actually a banker by profession, but the sort of depth, the sort of meaning, the sort of message that Kottoor has packed in his poems actually speak volumes about the person who believes that it is actually suffering which gives birth to real poetry. And we will witness how Kottoor makes us delve deep in his poetic world through his poetic sparks, and how he brings a sort of variety also. Actually, society also has a greater role to play in the formation of a poet, and also providing him with the different patterns of life, different experiences that help them soak, that help their thoughts sink, simmer and get forth into the forms of poetry. The socio-political conditions in post-independent India had quite a different sort of experience, especially for poets. Poets, instead of confining themselves to the world only of flora and fauna, only of love, came to bring in their oeuvre the everyday realities, and then certain questions of life, namely the everyday problems, suicide, diseases, death, poverty, and even some everyday affairs of life like anniversaries, marriages, fine, human relationships, they also became a part of poetry. So, the post-modern and post-independent Indian English poetry witnessed themes of alienation, corruption and dissatisfaction in many of the poets. We have already discussed how confessional poetry also came to affect many of our Indian poets, and then the poets tried to bring their personal experiences, making it impersonal. And that is why confessional poetry has also become very popular among many Indian poets. One can also find the imprint and the effect of Robert Loyal, Sylvia Plath, Annie Saxton on many Indian English poets. But at the same time, one could also find a sort of rebellion against emotional or social bondage. We have already talked about Kamla Das and many other poets who have depicted a sort of rebellion in their poetic oeuvre. Now, today we are going to discuss in this lecture the poetic oeuvre of Gopi Kottoor, who, as I told you, is a banker by profession, but the sort of creative writing that he has done, not only as a poet, but also as a novelist, also as a dramatist, also as a critic, also as a translator. So, Gopi Kottoor or Gopi Krishnan Kottoor was born in 1956 in Trivandrum, Kerala. He was actually educated at English Jesuit College, and then he took a master's in fine arts from the program of Texas State University, Southwest Texas, US. Kottoor has also an opportunity of being poet in residence at the University of Augsburg, Germany, on a sponsorship by ICCR in association with Tagore Center, Berlin. Gopi Krishnan Kottoor has his pen name Raghavji Nair, and not only does Kottoor write poetry, but he also has a journal poetry chain, fine, through which he encourages new and young poets, new voices. Kottoor has won several awards. To name a few are All India Special Poetry Prize of the British Council Poetry Society, All India Poetry Competitions, also in 1997. Apart from writing poems, he has also written a novel, and he is a playwright as well. Kottoor was very much influenced by John Keats, and he has mentioned at many places his influences of Keats, which actually help him write many poems, and also he did one drama. So, some of his works, namely Piccolo, Milestones to the Sun, Sunbursts in the Rain, Nirvana and other poems, then Reverend Father Benedict Goes to Heaven and other poems. And then what made Kottoor become very famous was one collection entitled Father Wake Us in Passing, which was also translated in German. And then he also wrote another collection named Mother Sonata, then a Buchenwald Diary, which is actually a collection which talks about the life of captives, fine, life of captive soldiers, and then Victoria Terminus, poem selected old, selected and new, and then another significant poetry collection that Kottoor brought out was Brindavan, the Coloured Yoke of Love, which came out in 2012. Then in 2014 came Tell Me Neruda, and then came The Painter of Evenings, New and Selected Poems, 1980 to 2018. Now, what does Kottoor write about? Kottoor is actually, if you read the poems of Kottoor, you will once again find a sort of spontaneity. Kottoor is a very simple poet, but very meaningful, fine. Kottoor avoids being sentimental and confessional. He often talks about death objectively. Pain is one of the main concerns of Kottoor's world. He has actually experienced pains. He has experienced the pathetic condition of his father, who was in coma, and then one of his collections, Father Wake Us in Passing, is also dedicated and devoted to his father. He is candidly satiric. Kottoor also voices contemporary feelings in the poetic garb of his small, simple words, but very meaningful. Kottoor focuses on the abandoned truths of life, which must be reflected upon for the sake of understanding our life better. Ayyappa Panikkar has rightly said that Kottoor is a poet who has discovered his own voice distinct from that of his ancestors or his compeers. So, we shall have a look at the poems of Kottoor to understand Kottoor's poetic world better. As I mentioned earlier, that his collection entitled Father Wake Us in Passing, which was translated in German by Wolfgang Heider in 2004 as Wetter Wecke Uns in Vorübergehen. Now, this collection has got 18 parts. Of course, this collection talks about the pain which his father suffered, and majority of the poems they are one can always say that maybe it is a sort of tribute to his father. So, the poems are titled like Frost, Cry, America, Telephone Call, Intensive Care Unit, Nectar of the Gods, Lone Ranger, Blue Petals, Gethsemane, Gift, ICU, Rocks of Cavalry, The Colors of Pain, Angels on the Moon, China Roses, Pigeons, Sea Crabs, Wedding Night, Magic Sleeper. And in this collection and in the other collection also entitled Mother Sonata, in which he talks about his own mother's problems, we can also come across many medical terms being used in the poems, but then they do not pose any difficulty when we read them. So, let us take the first poem from Father, Wake Us in Passing. The poems are very smooth, and it appears as if the poet in a very conversational manner telling his father and telling us all, this is not in memoriam, this is not an elegy, look, I have come across the seas for you. The poet was in Germany at that time, and then he says, I have come across the seas for you, I have cried alone in single rooms to forget the last frozen look in your eyes while I climbed the plain. And then there is another poem named Gift. Actually, majority of the poems of this collection are soaked in pain. I have now set out to do the things you loved most about me, about a gift called poetry. Never wrote like this before, perhaps never again must. Writing about pain is cruel. So, there is an element of truth. Writing about pain is cruel. I have set about writing what you perhaps would most love me to do, write about you. So, a tribute to the father. I am doing that, Father, but it is a kind of way neither of us dreamt we would ever do, for you hold my hand and I write on, though you cannot now lift your little finger through me, you flow. So, perhaps you could never have wanted me to write, fine, and you could never have thought that I will write about the pain, but then as I write it, it appears, though you cannot now lift your little finger, Father, you cannot lift your little finger, but through me you flow, your pains flow through me. So, this goes on to tell us that poetry is not only about the titillation, but poetry is about suffering. It is suffering that is the root of all poetry. Then comes another poem entitled I See You, and in every poem it appears that the poet is talking to his father, because the father was in coma and not able to talk. If I must see you, Father, again, I must peep in through the glass hole of the ICU, our second home. How many such homes do we have to cross? How many such homes do we have to cross? I go back to your room, sit by your empty bed, where your dog sleeps by your mattress, wondering where you have gone. I must go to mother to pasteurize her tears, read together the Buddha and the mustard seed. I must open the Bible, heavy with hammerings, driving iron nails upon Golgotha past midnight. So, you can find how the poet very candidly depicts the pains, the loss that he actually could come across in the passage of his father. Fine. And then comes the colors of pain. Your body the reminder of an ostrich clip, your flesh that covered me once in fine cool flannel. Again, we can find here a sort of memory being unfolded. In fine cool flannel, that our mouth that called me son now sealed off and banded to make room for the ventilator. So, how suddenly our relationship comes to a halt, but then how the person or the persona, how he memorizes it, how he unfolds it, only to get a sort of pain. But this pain, even in this pain there is a triumph, as the poet is actually reminiscing him. And then another poem entitled Magic Sleeper. This morning they brought you out on a bed on wheels, I called out to you to wake up. The poet knows that the father will not wake up because the father was in coma continuously. It was as if your red eyes that opened, blood nipped, was a third eye of God. Did you try to move them across to me? The tiny boats of our sad leaving, caught among the reeds. Do you hear me? Do you hear? Be our magic mountain, magic sleeper. Oh Father, why don't you be our magic mountain, magic sleeper? We'll keep our relation that pain is all the treasure we have here on earth. The poet becomes very realistic. That pain is all the treasure we have here on earth. Go back in now. We will wait here where we said we would. We'll keep our word for you. Come back and wake us in passing in paradise. Please wake us. So through this, the poet also tells the mankind, poet also tells all his fellow beings that let the Father, let the passing relations make us wake up. Let them awaken us to the dire realities and the reality that life is full of pains. The Buddhist way of life is full of pains, and it is only the pain that is actually a treasure. Why are we always struggling to get the pleasure in the mundane things of life? Life actually has to be lived, but then life also has to be celebrated, because life and death are the two phases. And we not only die, our bodies not only die, rather when we die, even in our death, we should wake up and let our Father wake us in passing in paradise. Now, if we have a look at the characteristic features of Kottoor's poems, we can find that all these poems from this collection, they actually depict a sort of anxiety, a sort of pain, a sort of suffering, because the poet's father was in coma and was dying. Man's plight and affliction that stem from his finite existence on earth. So, pain is in the poem, and then the broad spectrum of highly dramatic emotions, they all commingle when in pain. So, the poet actually makes his personal suffering very impersonal and in a supra-personal significant way. The comparison of the Father in the ICU is to the Christ, and through the passes of the Father, the poet actually makes all the human being, all the mankind realize that one should always be quite affectionate and should be obedient and should always be grateful to what lessons have been told, what lessons have been left behind by one's parents. So, there is a comparison of the Father to the Christ, and then there are biblical allusions which actually not only make the poem beautiful, but then they also make us ponder over. The depiction of his father's disease and wounds have been deliberately done in order to tell mankind that life is not full of pleasures, life is also full of suffering. The conversation with doctors and nurses, and that is why we come across many use of medical terms throughout the poems, fine, and the final journey to the infinite that all of us should remember, fine, and the poem also talks about the relationship between the Father and the Son. So, this relationship is a sort of metaphysical relationship, and we should always try to think of in a greater significance and should try to extract more meanings. The relationship of Father with the metaphysical world has got a lot for us to extract, to unravel, my dear friend. Now, about the characteristics of these poems, there is one comment that we can take. No psychological arrangement for a late patricide, no literary attempt at treating old source of childhood. On the contrary, amidst the world of intensive care and high technology medicine, a son sets about singing his dying father's praises in words and images. And that is why Father Wake Us in Passing has become a very beautiful piece, and for which Kottoor is being remembered. I mean, after this there came another collection entitled Mother Sonata, where he talks about the pains of his mother. Kottoor actually pays a tribute to his mother, and the poem is titled USG, ultrasonography. And look at the lines of the poem that are full of thoughts. And the lines are run on. There is no musicality in terms of meter and rhythm or whatsoever, but the meaning comes to us quite naturally, quite spontaneously. The doctor says, try and keep her happy, satisfy all her wishes. A farewell mounts bright purple on the ultrasound scan. Along her bed we light camphor and let her fall back in umber. As I watch her, her stare quickens, in her eyes break the falling ice of Himalayas. So one can see the pain that a son comes across when he finds his mother bidding adieu to this mundane world. And what we get out of this poem is, as the doctor says, try and keep her happy, satisfy all her wishes. My dear friend, old age is a reality, and in old age all our sons and daughters should try to see that they can keep their parents happy. A farewell mounts bright purple on the ultrasound scan, because during our old age, when we are perhaps bidding adieu to it, we are not able to express all our wishes and emotions, and then suddenly the poet actually makes a very metaphoric use. In her eyes break the falling ice of the Himalayas. And then these tears soaked eyes, these tears are just like gems. As I watch her, her stare quickens. The mother simply casts a last look, but then in her eyes one can find the falling ice. This falling ice is actually the coagulation of all sorts of emotion that are falling like the ice from the Himalayas, my dear friend. Actually, it would not be appropriate to call Kottoor a poet who is soaked in pain. Rather, Kottoor is a poet of love also. Whereas we could see the love of a son, love of a child to his parents, in another collection entitled Brindavan Poems, one can find how the poet unravels his love for the divine Krishna, for the divine love between Radha and Krishna. And through this Brindavan Poems, Kottoor became very famous. Here, we are also reminded of, when we talk about Krishna, suddenly we actually go back to Niranjan Mohanty's Krishna, but here there is a different sort of love. And here the poet does not talk about any contemporary problems, but here there is only love, love, love. Whereas in Mohanty's Krishna, he also talks about the contemporary problems of the world, but here it appears as if it is actually a love between two human beings which take the form of a sort of divine love. And the poet becomes here, in this, the poet becomes Radha. The poet does not become Krishna, and then there is a sort of conversation. And then through this love, the poet also talks about the love of the body. Is love only reminiscent of the body? That is what the poet talks about. The poem, this collection starts with the arrival, and the collection comes to an end with the departure. So there is a beautiful cycle of how we come to this earth and how finally we depart. But then what lives in and between us is the love between Radha and Krishna, the divine love, the love of the Brindavan. So let us take some of the lines, and through these beautiful lines we can find out how he packs meanings. He doesn't have to make any effort in order to make his poem beautiful. Rather, it appears that there is a frame in which suddenly the lines come and take their positions. Today is the day you said you will come. It is actually a day of waiting. Today is the day you said you will come. In the lotus pond are two blue lotuses. On the other shore, the bangle maker I see calls me Radhe. I have brought blue bangles all for your hands. In the afternoon grass, I see the wild blue snake upon the wet tuft. a chameleon dries in the sun, turning hydrangeal blue, all blue, Krishna, is that all? So, what actually the poet tries to convey here is that when you are love, everything becomes very unified. Love is a sort of unification, the unification of the body and the mind, the unification of the body and the soul. And the last poem, which is the departure, and through this and in between there are different poems where how Krishna and Radha talk to each other, how they swear, how they talk about love, how they make promises, how they interact with each other. And in the departure, the next time you come, Krishna, you won't have to search for me. It is actually the voice of Radha. The next time when you come, Krishna, you won't have to search for me in Brinda, not even in Brashna. Trace me back to your blue feather, wading in Radhamrit as you hold my hand and lead me, and we fall in love, galaxy upon galaxy. Radhe, Radhe, Radhe Krishna, 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 Radhe. The question is that love is such a force that not only unifies, but that actually makes the two one. There is no distinction between one or the other. Rather, it is a sort of oneness. And that is why Radha says, the next time you come, Krishna, you won't have to search for me anywhere. I mean, places do not matter. You can only find me to your blue feather wading in Radhamrit. Everything will become Radhamrit. Fine? So, everything will be poured in Radha. You will find me being poured in Radha as you hold my hand. Everything will have a touch, and this touch will be in love, galaxy upon galaxy, and that is why he says Radhe, Radhe. There are other poems also which we can take for our consideration. Captive in your heart, captive in my heart, I am quite, I know your regions 1001. I taste your flute, the bamboo smells, your breath song that is mine, captive in your heart. I watch the clouds pass. Nothing more I will say, nothing. Dew over you, I will stay, captive in your heart, set free. I am always a captive in your heart. Can you set me free? And then Radha again continues and in another poem says, how can I show you, Krishna, all my secret pores? You find that I am only love and you want me to know my secrets. How can I show you all my secret pores where my love for you hides? The gopis, they will all laugh. So, in love, it is not only a sort of unification, but in love, it is also a sort of play. And then I cannot tell you, I cannot show you all my secret pores because my friends, other gopis, they will laugh. Even you will be amused. How can I show you, Madhav, all the sad places where my love for you cries? My love for you cries even in sad places. My love is not meant only for joyous moments, but even in sad moments, I can tell you that even during sad moments, sad places, I cry for your love. Even you will shed tears if you really want to know them all. Disrobe your bright Pitambara, come under the Yamuna, there, break me, take it all. And one more poem that I want to take is how on this human earth, all of us simply have a feeling that love is in the body. And then the question that is being raised here, is love just the body? Is love just the body, beloved? Is your love just my body, Krishna? I mean, through this, the poet actually wants to give a message to this fighting mankind, to the mankind which is always confabulating whether body is true or the soul is true. So, is love just the body, beloved? Is your love just my body, Krishna? Or is it rather formless lightning? Is it you, your blue body, warm as the kingfisher's feather, untouched by every water? What is love? So, there is actually a talk There is a question. What is love? Is love soul, bereft of the thirst of longing, or our bodies entwined in the night ooze of the senses among the dipped blue lotuses? Tell me, am I the flute, Radhe? Is the flute me? Don't you remember me with every note, though you are the song that pours and pours? So love must be when you can't just tell the body from the soul. Love does not know how to distinguish the body from the soul, how to discriminate the body against the soul. Love is just love. Fine. Again, there we can find a sort of Shakespearean sweep. No, love is love. It never alters when it alteration finds. Fine. So where the colors of rainbow prism colorless, there flows love with me in you, you and me, you in me and you in you. When you open to me as your eyelids close, there is just our togetherness turning divine, steadfast as moonlight upon calm Yamuna in unassuming celestial flow. Love is actually a sort of ambience. Love is a sort of feeling. Love is a sort of feeling that actually blinds you to the other dire necessities of this mundane world. Love is not body. Love is not ephemeral. Love is eternal. Love is divine. Love is actually a sort of unification. Love is in knowing that you are in me and I am in you. I mean, there is a sort of togetherness in love. So we can find that Gopi Kottoor actually makes or tries to give a message through the divine love of Radha and Krishna. He tries to pass on the message to this mankind on earth, that love is not only about body, love is actually a feeling, love is about a sort of unification, the unification of the feeling that it does not divide, it does not disintegrate, rather it is a sort of integrity of the body and the soul together. There is another poem entitled Coffin Maker, where what the poet wants to say is that even a person like coffin maker can be happy, devoid of what profession he has taken, but he also has got the right to be happy. And then when the what the poem describes here is, the coffin maker is a happy man now, more and more orders keep coming in, soon he will be able to marry off. Even though his profession can be considered to be a despicable one, but yet he is happy. Why? Of late he painted his house bright chrysanthemum red, ordered teakwood beds and never cared a damn what the neighbors said. Atop his showroom the great cat lights came on and his name glowed in the dark whenever passing lights hit it. Even a common person has got the chance to be happy. What about air conditioning? That would lengthen the life of coffins. Now he is struck with a bright new idea that would revolutionize coffin making for all time. Electronic remote control polymer coffins with microchips and inbuilt flash units that brought home to your PC screen. You dear departed along with up-to-date information on the state of decomposition. I mean, the newer techniques of man being given the last rites, and that actually makes the coffin maker happy, that you could activate or slow down much like a video game. Now whenever he kneels down with Angela to pray, he can only think of this, no one else can help him raise such funds, so high tech. The poet actually talks about the materialistic outlook of the world, and then he says that there can be a vicissitude even in the life of a coffin maker, which of course secretly meant more and more accidents, casualties, fatalities. Of course, work was worship. It didn't matter what you did, you just had to put in your best. There could be no wrong asking. Fine, there can be no wrong asking. So whatever profession it is, your profession is good and one has got the chance to be happy. There's another poem named My Daughter Reports a Senior Suicide, and then we can only take up the last lines. Lips gone cold on thresholds of beauty, and a mind cut inside salted flesh, baked in sprouting the alphabets of love. The poison she ran to, it was only because of a love affair, the love that could not be fructified, and that actually led to a very unpleasant situation. And then he says, the persona here says, why dear, I ask her in my mind, somebody fallen in love has been jilted, but things are very simpler. Fine. So, somebody being jilted in love, his parents had a strange, that baffles me, and the love finally had a very different sort of consequence. Back in my mind, a young girl, the poison she ran to, lips gone cold, on thresholds of beauty, and a mind cut inside salted flesh, baked in sprouting alphabets of love. Now, we can continue discussing the poetic world of Gopi Kottoor because it's so vast, but then it is time that we took what inspired Kottoor to write poetry, and what did he understand by the process of poetry. As he says, I feel that the process of poetry is like blood running in the body. It is actually just like the blood running in the body. The body does its function. Poetry for which you are ordained is doing its job all the while, whether you are aware of it or not. Poetry is spontaneity. Poetry is a flow. The poetry runs within, taking resources from all around and stirs with emotions of all kinds. You cannot shut your eyes, you cannot shut your heart to all the happenings which are going around you, and poetry keeps on taking its birth. When the trigger comes, poetry actually bleeds. So, this is actually the gist of what Kottoor believes in the poetic process. We can also take a very quick look on what critics think about Kottoor's poetry. In this regard, what Panikkar says is very significant. Krishnan's poetry comes of age in the sustained polyphony of his own voice. His poetry is in the making, gushes forth as the floodgates open. There is no let up in the intensity of the pain or in the intensity of the poem. There is a sort of continuity. And as I have been saying, that many people might try to compare Gopi Kottoor with Niranjan Mohanty, but then what Sitakant Mahapatra, another famous Oriya poet, says, late Niranjan Mohanty's Krishna was only on a slightly different pitch. It was not so detailed nor so long in describing their intense intimacy. As I told you earlier, that through Krishna, Niranjan Mohanty was also talking about the contemporary problems of this mundane world. But in the world of Gopi Kottoor, the poet goes to even very small details. The procession of events include early spring in Brindavan's Kamdev's flight, mango season, golden willow, jasmines, et al. Radha is filled up emotionally and physically. The body and soul could never be seen in isolation. The body is the soul and the soul is the body, and together they make a sort of divine love. The last comment is by Chandravaga, which says, Kottoor's poetry is powerful and touching. The use of everyday language, strong visual imagery, and controlled pathos make the volume distressing and therefore effective poetry. My dear friends, the world of Kottoor, or the poetic world of Kottoor, is so vast and varied that one lecture cannot suffice. But then time has come that we have to sum up, and let us sum up from one of the poems entitled Poetry by Gopi Kottoor. You are not to me a token for fame. Erase my name, I will still make love to you. I don't want to be what you don't want to give me. I want to give you all I have. I will lay down my life for you. I will lay you down like a fresh body, all lavender smells, all awake and risen. And how much I love you, that love knows not itself. So, this is actually the love of Gopi Kottoor for poetry. Such love that I want you, that I must no longer come with you. So, even in death, I will not turn to sleep. poetry. Union of you and me, I will not turn to sleep without you, but I must always had you naked beside me, half clothed the other side. So this actually gives us a quintessence of what Gopi Kottoor thought about poetry and believed about the poetic process. Let poetry continue its spontaneous flow. Let it not cease. Let it continue. Let it delight. Let it enlighten. Thank you very much. I have to wind up this lecture at this juncture. Thank you very much. Good night.